Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Layden, and I would like to contribute to our virtual conference on urgent human rights issues with the current issue related to Guapinol, which is in Honduras, and the human rights violations surrounding rights defenders in that region. First, I will start by saying that Honduras is considered the deadliest country per capita for land activists. Scholars emphasize the dangers and hostility that human rights defenders experience in the country. In one particular region, surrounding the Guapinol River, indigenous communities and activists have been fighting against the building of dams and mines. With this, the region has seen numerous accounts of hostility towards these rights defenders through murders, disappearances, forced evictions and land dispossessions, and accusations of torture. Overall, we see violence and repression against these human rights activists. I have included Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a reminder of people's right to life, liberty, and security in the context of this continual violence. In addition, Article 5, which states the right to not be subjected to torture or other cruel and inhumane treatments. When looking into this region, the fight surrounding the Guapinol River comes from the extractivist industry of dam construction and mining in the area. This has led to numerous concerns with regards to access to water, not only as a source of drinking, but also as a source of land use and land occupation. Of course, there is much more to this issue that you may consider examining on your own time. I would like to note, however, that the original fight to stop the building of a dam has led into Indigenous concerns over the government's protection, focusing on corporations rather than the people. I have included Article 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with regards to the right to equal protection under the law. As I mentioned, violence is a human rights concern in this case. While I cannot highlight every case, one of the more well-known is that of Berta Cáceres, who was killed in 2016. And yes, while the human rights concerns of the Guapinol River are still happening today, Berta Cáceres was also an activist for this exact same reason, for context of how long this has been an issue for these communities. And her death in 2016 simply sparked global attention. Another key human rights concern is that of illegal detentions of these activists. The main focus here being the illegal detention of 8 activists who were peacefully fighting for their right to clean water from the Guapinol River. I will highlight this further in the presentation. On this slide, I would like to point out the group CMD-BCP, the Municipal Committee for the Defense of Common and Public Property. I have also included the Spanish version of their name. This group brings together several organizations who resist extractive industries in the region. They are often the main group when referring to human rights activists on the Guapinol case. So the Guapinol 8 are the activists who have been illegally detained for their peaceful actions in attempts to protect their rights. There's 8 of them, which is where the name comes from, 8 men. As I mentioned earlier, this is the case of illegal detention that I wish to highlight as the most current concern into the case by international actors. So the Guapinol 8 are members of the CMD-BCP and have been detained after fighting for their right to clean water and for being activists within the group. They have been held for more than 28 months or more than 2 years. The 8 voluntarily presented themselves after forced and violent evictions from a temporary camp set out in order to peacefully protest against the mining projects which were hindering their drinking water. The trial for the defenders restarted on the 13th of January, 2022. For those watching during our virtual conference, that is less than 2 weeks ago. As we are participating in this virtual conference, the men are still detained. However, within the next couple of months, the international community expects a trial response with regards to the detention of these activists. On this slide, I would like to discuss the international response to these human rights concerns. It is one thing for us to recognize them as human rights concerns, such as through Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that no one should be subject to arbitrary detention. But it is also crucial to recognize that the international community categorizes it as such too. First, Amnesty International, which we briefly discussed in lecture as an international non-government organization, or INGO, calls for the immediate and unconditional release of these men. As a reminder, Amnesty International has significant impact on the international community with its focus on human rights and 150 countries and territories as members. In addition, on April 16th of 2020, the National Mechanism and Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment reviewed the detention of the Guapinol defenders. In 2020, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that there was no legal reason for the use of pretrial detention in this case. It emphasized the risk that these members are in due to the context of COVID-19. The working group asked for the immediate release of this illegal detention. I would like to emphasize the fact that the international community, including a United Nations body, has recognized the detention of these individuals as illegal and hinders their human rights. This slide is also key to our human rights conversation internationally. And while human rights are sometimes hard to properly describe or explain, there is international support towards classifying this case as a major human rights concern. So it is important to recognize what has been done in order to tackle these human rights issues occurring in Guapinol, Honduras. So there are major concerns with regards to this case towards the lack of progress. As I mentioned earlier, these human rights concerns regarding mining and dam construction on Indigenous and local land has been a source of human rights defenders for many years. Concerns arise again with the continuation of violence towards these activists. Pablo Isabel Hernandez was killed on the 10th of January 2022. For those watching during our virtual conference, that's just a few weeks ago. He was a defender of human rights and was part of the same community as Berta Caceres, Indigenous rights defender who was murdered in 2016. While Berta brought global attention to these activists on Honduras, some scholars state that after the many years have passed, the issue has not seen improvement. The country remains a very dangerous location for human rights defenders. Unfortunately, the Honduran government is often called an opponent to its citizens achieving their basic human needs. As mentioned earlier, the international community, such as international non-government organizations and the United Nations, has its eye on this case. As discussed in lecture, there is power for progress behind human rights laws being norms expected of individual countries. While international law may not be legally binding, it is a key source of pressure for countries such as Honduras to comply. In October of 2021, Honduras was elected as a member of the Human Rights Council. As a reminder, this is a United Nations body which is used as a system for monitoring and enforcing human rights. Unfortunately, it appears as though Honduras has continued to ignore the findings of the UN Working Group relating to the detention of the Guapinol 8, regardless of its status as a member of the UN Human Rights Council. However, there is potential for change through pressure with Honduras's new membership. So what can be done? What needs to be done in this human rights case? First, there needs to be continued international and global pressure for the Honduran government to follow human rights expectations. There is the hope that global pressure will encourage the upcoming trial within the next few months with regards to the Guapinol 8 to release these men unconditionally. Global pressure, meanwhile, continues through actions such as the ones suggested by Amnesty International. Amnesty International has outlined systems for people to show their support towards this human rights concern, such as sending a letter or email to the Attorney General related to the Guapinol 8 case. If you wish, you may pause the video here to read what Amnesty International has provided as an example letter. I'm just going to move my, so you got that information there. Here we go. So to conclude, the Guapinol, Honduras has multiple human rights concerns. While the human rights concerns vary greatly, the specific case of the Guapinol 8 is a way to try and assist in a manageable format. The human rights concerns of wrongful detention is one that the international community is, to this day, actively combating. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I'll now show my references.